had to undo everything I learned in church. Man, that was a frightening space to stand in. It was a very sobering, scary place. But gosh, what a freeing space to be able to stand in. Once I did that, it was scary to get there. But yeah, I mean, I had to unravel my belief system.
Welcome to the At Sea podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. The question, what do you do, or what do you do for a living, is not so much a question about work, as it is a way we often work to figure out who someone is. It's a question of identity. And that relationship between who I am and what I do can be tricky, or even confusing. Too closely tying my identity to my work can lead towards a dehumanized utilitarian view of my own humanity, while drawing a thick black line between who I am and what I do can lead to a kind of dysphoria. My guest on this episode is Carlos Whittaker, and Carlos has developed apps, he's written and performed songs, he's led an online weight loss program, he's taught courses on the proper use of Instagram and Snapchat, as well as having written 2 books, including his most recent book, called Kill the Spider, which we talk about quite a bit in this conversation. As I think you'll hear between Carlos and I, his process, his evolution vocationally, has been one in which he has relentlessly pursued a sense of place in the world, a sense of purpose in the world, at the cost of safe career steps, and even at times at the cost of safe religious conclusions. All the while, he invites his readers and listeners to join him in his process. Check it out. How was the trip?
The road was exhausting, but really fulfilling.
Okay.
You know, I think I've never gone as hard as I have the last 2 months. Obviously the book launch and all that stuff. But like in March when I was calendaring it out, I was like, oh, no problem. Just go out. And then man, 2 weeks ago, I was like, I think I'm going to quit. Like I'm done. Like, so
the idea the idea of the road and the work and like putting, the sweat and tears and it's it's going to be great. And then it's like, it's legit. Just like that, like 20 minutes into the 35-minute workout, you're like, I might not ever do this again.
That is exactly what it is. Cause it's like, I'm going to make all my money like in 8 weeks for the next 4 months. What a great idea.
What a great idea, he said.
No. Yeah, because I'm like, then I'm just going to like go fishing every day. And then, but no, I'm literally have to just like recover now.
Yeah. You still like the road? You still like being out? I mean, like, cause you've been at, well, I mean, and we'll talk about this kind of the evolution of what you've done, but like, you've been at it for a while. I mean, it's been well over a decade and a half. And there's a lot of travel that's come with that. Yeah. Do you still like the road? Do you still kind of like, no, really? You're done.
Yeah. I don't like it. I don't like getting to where I'm going. I love once I'm there.
Like the travel part, you're done. If you could
man,
like particle accelerate yourself from one town to the next, you'd be in.
Yeah. Star Trek. I love standing on stages and slinging hope to people. But man, just because at the end of the day, like I'm speaking for 40 minutes somewhere, but it takes 2 days of my life in order to pull that off. That's the part that I'm just like, man, I gotta figure something out because I'm so exhausted. Now, of course, I'm saying this at the end of this 8 week run. Talk to me in a month and I'll be like, oh yeah, let's go to Norway.
Fired up, ready to go. Here we go. Yeah. I just threw together another 8 weeks.
Totally.
I know the feeling. Yeah. So if someone was to ask you, someone who doesn't know you, you come off of 8 weeks, you run into someone at a coffee shop, let's say Crema. Let's just as an example, as a possibility, like you might be.
Maybe, possibly, hypothetically.
And they ask you how you're doing, conversation, and then they ask you, what do you do? Which is, we can talk about this later on too, in terms of like, the what do you do versus who you are question. But, so what do you do? How does Carlos Whittaker explain, like, so what do you do?
Well, I've accidentally started saying something that has become just kind of my go-to. I tell people that I'm a hope slinger.
Okay.
That's what I say now. That's like my job description. I'm a hope slinger. And
you're like begging questions. You're answering questions with answers that beg more questions.
Yes, that beg more questions. And so that's what I do, man. Like I try to sling hope, whether it be in written form, whether I'm talking,
right,
whether I'm creating an app for somebody to everything I do has to be centered around delivering hope to people. And so it's kind of what I do now. Right now I'm an author and a speaker, and I hate that because it sounds like I'm Tony Robbins, but that's kind of what is paying most of the bills right now is writing books and selling books and standing on stages.
Yeah. So you're a hope slinger. Someone digs into that and you talk about speaking. I mean, you used to play a lot of music. Are you playing much music anymore?
No, man, I haven't played well, that's not true. I do with my kids around the sofa.
Right.
But I haven't.
But like music. Vocationally, professionally, nope. It's sort of.
2014.
That was the last time.
That was the last time. 2000. Well, actually, I mean that's like I've done it.
let's get to the truth, Carlos.
Yeah. I've done it. I would say maybe one time a year I am in some way, shape, or form forced to through some contractual obligation to do it. But I probably have led worship or done music 3 times since 2014.
Is that a conscious choice? Like, did you feel like this shift in you and you chased it down, or did it just kind of evolve and you ran with it?
No, it was a shift that I actually didn't chase down. It chased me down. I avoided it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I avoided it for 6 months. I avoided it, and then it finally caught up with me, and I had to I had to face it, and I did. I consciously went and I canceled 87 worship leading opportunities in 2014. This was in January of 2014, and I sent all of them. So again, deposits were going back, the whole thing, and I sent all of them emails saying, "Hey, but I would love to come and speak at your event. Like if you need a speaker." And I could hear them laughing over email. They're like, "No, we're fine. We wanted you to come sing." So it was a very conscious and terrifying decision that ultimately paid off in the end.
Yeah, and you feel like you sort of maybe like rediscovered, or you sort of like located yourself and what you're wanting to be doing as more of like an orator and a writer. Yes.
This is definitely I think, or at least for this season right now. Where, gosh, man, it's such a good space. I love to open up my laptop and I love to write, and I love to I love to tell stories. I'm a storyteller. When I first shifted into communicating, and most of the spaces that I communicate are at conferences or churches. I'd say in the last 7 months, I've suddenly surprisingly shifted to be communicating on like a lot of business stages, a lot of sales conferences, a lot. It's just kind of random. We can talk about it later, but there's when you first move from like a one facet of storytelling being through song, to another through spoken word, there was I was in such a sea of like what am I supposed to sound like? How do I do this? Am I supposed to preach like T.D. Jakes? Am I supposed to speak like Carl, Judah Smith? Or am I supposed to, what does it look like? And so it's funny because I can go back to watch myself in 2014, and I'm basically a ventriloquist. Like I'm trying to be, and I finally.
Like you're trying to do one thing through the other thing. Like you're trying to like be a speaker through the guitar and like
And then I'm trying to like sound exactly like this preacher or speak exactly like this guy. And I think it took about a year for me to really find my space in. No, I'm a storyteller. Like I'm not going to get up and preach fire and brimstone and get a whole bunch of amens and this and that. No, like I'm going to tell stories, and through those stories, there may be some points that people can walk away with, but at the end of the day, my storytelling is going to be the way that I communicate, and that's what it's really turned into.
And so this is kind of what I was angling at a second ago when I was talking about, or not a second, a couple minutes ago, but we're talking about the sort of the distance, or there's a distance and there's a connection between like who you are and what do you do. Like you don't want to like it's the way we kind of discover one another to some degree. Like, so tell me what you do, and I kind of dig around there and figure out who you are. But there also is specifically for someone who's in the arts, maybe specifically. I would say to some degree uniquely for folks who work in the arts, there is this really close emotional identification with your work, and like you're a songwriter, you're a communicator, you're a storyteller, etc. And when you letting go of a piece of that, it's not just this like, well, I used to work in marketing and now I work in direct sales. It's like I used to be a songwriter, and a performer. And now I am someone else because I am that shift is like it's more personal. Do you feel a loss? Like you and I have a mutual friend in Andy Osenga who's got a podcast called I think it's called The Pivot, and that's entirely about like folks who have made a shift in some way, shape, or form in their vocational life and all that comes with that. And part of what ends up happening in some of those conversations is like there's this sense of identity shift. And like you even talked about it a second ago, where like I'm trying to figure out who I am in this. Like I'm standing behind the guitar, but I don't feel like the guy who's standing behind the guitar. Like there's something else happening. So is there a loss there? Can you talk about that transition and sort of the letting go and the gaining and that process?
Yeah, there is going to be a definite letting go. I mean, it is and a loss. I mean, there was such I didn't realize how much identity I'd placed on title of high energy worship guy. Like I didn't realize that had become such a valuable part of who I was until I was no longer that. And man, so I'd say it took about a year for me to this is just for me to not mourn that. I mean, I was really mourning that. I would show up at an event and I would sit in the pews or wherever, and someone would be leading songs and singing. And gosh, man, there was such a mourning for me because what I did, again, like I made a conscious decision to like to sever that part of, and this is more business kind of strategy, but to sever that part of my my identity as far as like a platform.
Right.
And so when I did that, I said no to every music opportunity in order for me to really kind of accelerate the new identity that I found myself in. And so doing that, there was a loss. About a year in, the loss was less. And honestly, now we're 3-4 years into this, the new side of kind of who I am, my identity being placed in. And I don't in any way, shape, or form miss that side of things. I've found such a calling in what I'm doing now that, gosh, it almost seems like, man, like, why didn't I figure this out earlier? Why didn't I do this earlier? And so, I mean, even yesterday, like at my church, here, like in Nashville, like it's the most incredible musicians and singers. And like, I run cameras at my church. Like I'm, I think 3 years ago, that would have been the hardest thing in the world for me to do, is to run cameras during a worship
point
set.
The camera at the dude who's doing the thing you want to be doing.
Yes. And now, gosh, it's so much fun. And I'm singing into the microphone on my headset, and the video director's like, "Hey, Carlos, can you stop singing?" Like I'm just, it's shifted and it's changed and it's good, but it definitely was hard.
There's one more example of the ways in which the death plays a very real role in the process of flourishing as a human, and whether or not and the choice, and you get into this in your book, which we're going to talk to you about in a minute, but whether you choose to embrace it, like you're gonna die, like these things you're gonna die in every possible way. Like there isn't a way in that death happens that you are not going to experience.
Right. Yep.
So whether or not you enter into that and embrace that, like you talk about, like you severed. I mean, even the word sever, it's like, here's a decision I'm making. Here's a thing I'm feeling. Here's a death that's starting that's going to make room for a new life in me. I'm just going to cut this thing off now and let, like an actual pruning, and let new things happen. Whether or not, I do that actually ends up being the question, a matter of whether or not I enjoy the process or not. Because I'm going to die. Do I enjoy the process of death in life? So you talk about pointing cameras at folks. You've talked about speaking music. You do quite a bit. And you also just a minute ago referenced like building apps. You do online courses.
Yeah.
So one of the, like, in terms of identity and work, are you, I guess to some degree you may be clearer now, but like, have you experienced ever like a sort of like identity confusion of like how should I say this? Here's the question. because you do so many things and you have like this sort of breadth of talents, which ends up being true of a lot of more creatively minded folks. Did you experience over seasons like sort of an identity confusion, not just between, like you talked about, like between music and speaking, but like how to fit in app development and online course development? Or like, did you have kind of this, like, here are my big rocks and then here are the small stones thing? Like, how did you navigate, like, you have all these things you can do, what things are you prioritizing? How did you work that out?
You know, I think where I had that identity confusion, to be honest with you, most of all was when I was working for the church. So when I was like on staff at a local church was when I was more confused than I've ever been, because I feel like people like creatives like you and I, and I don't want to lump people into one thing here, but I feel like
but it's so much easier though.
it really is. It really is. Let's
categorize so we can rattle all these folks off.
We are. Yeah. And so, but I think like we get so screwed in kind of the modern version of what modern evangelicalism looks like in a Sunday and during the week, because we're a lot of us are starters. Like, we love to begin things, we love to start things, we love to and I look at kind of what church staff looks like, and there's not space for me in there. And so, like, I had to be Carlos, the worship guy, period. And if I had any side hustle, if I had anything on the side, if I was, trying to creatively express myself in some other way, like that, I was almost punished for that. And so I think most of my confusion came when I was working at the local church, because they just were not, I couldn't find one that was hip to me doing more than just one thing.
Yep.
And I think once I left, which is just, it's so sad, because I think, man, like, I look at Paul's ministry. I look and I'm thinking, that guy never stayed. Like, he was like, he'd start something and he'd go somewhere else and he'd continue to pour into it, but he'd start something else and he'd start something else. And I don't know if he'd be welcome to work in a local church these days, because he's just there's just not room for somebody that thinks like that. Now, again, this is broad categorization. This isn't. I'm seeing more and more churches that are allowing people to come in and people to do that. But that is where I was most confused as to my role, was when I was kind of trapped between the four walls of, in a cube, and what I ended up doing, which I wish I wouldn't have. There was a lot of callousness and a lot of wounds that ended up happening because of that. And I think for too long, I kind of was like, you know what, Carlos works for the local church. I mean, the global church, not the local church. And I think those calluses have slowly but surely begin to fall off, and there's some fresh stuff happening inside of the local church for me again. But most of that confusion, to answer your question, really came at that point. Now, like now I don't see, there is zero confusion for me when it comes to, I may start a TV show next week, and then an app the next week. And I think, again, for me, as long as I'm throwing hope to people, and people at my platform, my fan base have seen me do so many things that I think they're kind of used to seeing a lot come from me. Like, hey, what's Carlos going to come up with the next 6 months?
Right.
Oh, it's a weight loss program, it's
which you've done,
which I've done. And it's like, but again, like, that's just it's in my DNA now, and it doesn't feel weird to me anymore.
So to some degree, like, part of what you've been able to, because you've done so many things, part of what you've been able to, I guess, like, come to or recognize and communicate is that you're passing you on, that, like, you are it's actually about Carlos Whittaker.
Yes.
And it's not about Carlos Whittaker, the this, that, or the other. Like, here are the ways I'm actually presenting. So you talk about you're a hope slinger. And to some, like, you almost have to have a tag to some degree in terms of answering, because you have to have a business card. But ultimately, you're passing yourself on to the world as best you can, and how how you do that is it is tertiary, it's secondary, it's and it can change, so that you're not wrapping up your identity in a particular expression of who you are, which gets back to part of what you experience, what so many folks do in institutional religious settings. There's a really specific, and we'll pretend it's tried, tested, and true a way of passing ourselves on in American, predominantly white American evangelical Christianity.
Yep.
And this is how this is done. This is how you pass yourself on. Here are the metrics. Here are the methodologies. And so you squeeze yourself into this thing, or there's not enough room for you, or there's not a value for what you do. And you find yourself stuck in that place where artistically, it really wasn't actually about you as a person. It was about you as a cog in a wheel.
Yes.
And
so good.
Gosh, like, well, that's, I think to some degree, and this is, I'm just joining you in the critique. Yeah, I think there are a number of spaces, maybe an increasing number of places in American evangelical Christianity, which there's a little bit more room for folks to be entrepreneurial, be creative, be flexible.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, in a lot of spaces, it's just becoming, it's showing up because these are spaces that are in the death throes of like the tail end of what will ultimately have been a short history, and like they're trying to figure out how to stay alive instead of trying to figure out how to flourish. There just aren't a lot of religious spaces in evangelical Christianity trying to figure out how to flourish, behind creativity and follow the lead of entrepreneurship. It's like, well, how do we use this to keep ourselves alive? This sort of like a resuscitation device, so that we can get back to this sort of serfdom model that we've been rolling out since the 1940s. So you got squeezed by this in the same way that a lot of folks do, and I love the way you communicate this, which actually leads me to your book. You part of you undoing a lot of that. You go through in this process the book Kill the Spider. Such a fun book, man. Such a great book. And I think a lot of folks are resonating with the same way that I am, which was you're able to level a critique that is couched in love. Like, you don't communicate a disdain for evangelicalism. Sure. You don't communicate, but you certainly do have a point of critique. You don't communicate a disdain for the church, but you certainly do have a point of critique.
Yes.
In a broad sense, getting this part of what you end up doing with the book, and there's a real specific moment I'll get to in a second, is communicating a way in which you kind of had to leave your religious culture and almost everything about your religion.
Yeah.
In order to become whole and human.
I did. I had to almost, not almost, I had to undo everything I learned in church. I did. Like, I finally realized that I had come to a semblance where I had grown, I had created an entire faith based on sermons that I had listened to, and not based on what God had specifically told me. Yeah. And man, that was a frightening space to stand in. It was a very sobering, scary place, but gosh, what a freeing space to be able to stand in once I did that. It was scary to get there, but yeah, I mean, I had to unravel my belief system. I had to unravel everything. I mean, I had to start asking the simple, basic questions of, okay, I know that Andy Stanley preached this amazing message on the Christmas story, but do I really believe that?
Yeah.
Do I, at the end of the day, like, is this something that I'm willing to wrestle with? And so, yeah, I've spent a lot of years, specifically one strategic week at a experiential therapy center, right, an hour outside of Nashville, that really helped me do that and helped me kind of identify a lot of the lies that I'd been believing and step into some truths.
And when you get into this, and there's a bit I want to get to about like therapy and Christian practice in general, and you communicate a little bit of the terror of doing this in the book about being able to say like, hey, I'm not sure I buy any of this anymore. Yeah. And to do so without, well, how should I say? You're working with a Christian publisher. You're turning this book in. Do you sense that sort of pressure to like, as you're telling these stories, to I don't want to say like kind of glaze over, but like it's the thing that like happens is like, sure, there's the song on Christian radio about the storm, but the third verse is gonna be calm waters, and we're gonna get out of this thing. Yeah, you didn't like. Everything about your book says like you don't want to necessarily give people you don't want to dangle the lifeline right through the entire book. Yeah. But at the same time, like, Christian publishers aren't exactly hip to like, we're going to drop this book that leaves people hanging and wondering what they believe. Right. Like, talk about the tension of communicating a story that leaves you to some degree partially deconstructed and partially having to let go of things, but also having to be kind of, I guess, pass that into a culture in which certainty is idolized. Like you're undoing all these things that you were certain about. The book is about, like, to a great degree, like letting go a lot of these certainties so you can become whole and actually experience something you might want to call faith.
Right.
Like in the meanwhile, the culture you're trying to preach to, trying to sling hope to, in this case, for the most part, really does value certainty. Can you talk about, like, were there conversations between the publisher? Like, how does that writing process happen? Like, are you nervous about certain stories? Give me some of that.
Yeah, it was. I luckily have one of the most incredible editors in Carolyn, and she knew. So I told her the story before this even became a book, right? So I said, hey, listen, I think that this is going to be my next book. Like, I think, it's going to be my kind of, with the story arc of me being at onsite. And, but I said, I cannot write this book with sugarcoating it. Like I can't do that, or I can't write this book. It's going to
because that's the heartbeat of the narrative is like, here's all the stuff that I thought was real, and it's almost all sugarcoating.
Yeah.
So if you sugarcoat a story that's about getting rid of the sugarcoating, you lose.
Yes, you do. And so she was my champion from the beginning to the publisher when when I first began to get into some drafts and the things like that. And there was just like you anticipated or spoke of, there were some hard conversations of, man, like this actually isn't resolving like we need it to resolve. Yeah. We need the third verse that is going to talk about calm water, Yeah. It's funny, somebody actually, I can't remember, there was one of the early Amazon reviews that came in, stated, I love this book. It actually left me with more questions than answers, which I think is a good thing. And again, like no author would ever think to write a book that leaves people but I did. Like, I feel like that's what, like, I'm not trying to give you A + B = C here. I wrote a book from a place where I was really raw and showing my pain and showing that this is how I got out of my pain. But let me go and tell you, this may not be the way you get out of yours. And this may not be the way that you overcome these medicating behaviors in your life. No, like it's gonna take work. It's gonna take you rolling up your sleeves. It's gonna take, your therapist is gonna tell you something different than my therapist did. But at the end of the day, there's common truths at the end of my book that I think people in the faith would all circle around and say, yep, that's right. But it's still it's still very loose. I would say in the book, to where I didn't want to tie it with such a tight bow that people may think, oh well, this isn't working for me.
So, and therapy plays this major role. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about, there's this great moment in your book as you're getting dropped off by your family and you're describing to your family as best you can, like what it is you're about to go into. Although you really actually at the time had no freaking idea, like there's just no idea what you're getting yourself into. A couple things, like I'd love to hear you talk about, like if you'd done, like what your experience with therapy had been before. You talk a little bit about it in the book. But I think was it your son? Is it Losiah who says, like, how are you going to get fixed without Jesus?
Yes.
Which is such I'll be honest with you, brother. Like, it's such a great moment in the book, and the fact for several reasons, because, and this is part of what I want you to get to. Yeah. There's the world of Christian practice and spiritual formation and what have you, and Christian counseling. Yep. And then there's the world of therapy. Yep. And like, I don't think there is a dividing line between those two things at all. But the way they're talked about, the way they're treated in Christian culture is like therapy is a thing for folks whose spiritual lives are so jacked at the church that like they don't know how to talk to God, so they're going to go do therapy. And there's sort of this like, you're so sick that Jesus can't help you. And so we're going to put you over, like, let you go see a therapist. But if you were just healthy enough as a Christian, we could probably work with you over here in a religious setting. You dive all the way in, and it's like there's this high value for therapy as therapy. This is not a Christian thing. This is therapy. This is about me as a person.
Yes.
Can you talk about that moment? Maybe even retell a little bit of that moment of being in the car and having to deal with like, oh snap, like I don't really know like. How am I going to get fixed without Jesus, which is part of the undoing of the narrative? And then talk about your experience of therapy.
Yeah, when I'm glad you caught that, because when I did write that, there was a semblance of kind of a smirk that I wanted the reader to kind of get at is listen, like, I mean, don't you just need to go listen to another sermon or a podcast on 5 steps to a better marriage in order to pull this off? Like, why would you need anything other than what the church and Jesus can give you? And, at the time when when my kid asked me that, I really didn't know, but this place that I went to was not a Christian place. Now, were there Christians that worked there? Sure. But here's even the most beautiful thing is that it's group therapy. So there's 40 of us and we break into small groups of 10. So there's 4 different small groups that we spend with one therapist. And my therapist, Barb, was she's not even a Christian. I mean, she's as far from Christian as you could ever believe. And I did not realize how bad I needed that, like how bad I needed somebody that wasn't going to Jesusify me the way I had been for so long. And so it was, man, obviously in the book, I unpacked just the beautiful way in which my faith was restored through somebody that has no faith. Okay. When I say no faith, she's got plenty of faith, but not in the faith that I have. Right. And that I would be able to come back to a place of being whole in Jesus because I was taken on a journey hand in hand with somebody that doesn't believe in Jesus. And there was just something so beautiful about that, that still I'm not lost on. And so, that happens. And, my dad even tells me a story on the way to on-site. That's pretty Jesus centric, but then also not, and I my relationship with therapy after that was probably, I probably realized even more that it doesn't need to be a quote unquote Christian therapist that helps you along as one of the sages in your journey, as one of the, utterly believe that that Christian prayer, inner healing ministry is not only valuable, but is necessary. And it was very necessary in my journey. Once I got home from on-site, I found an inner healing place and somebody that was like a ninja with prayer, this 78-year-old man who this is kind of like his thing. But what you said is so valuable because the clinical therapy community and the inner healing communities, there is a dividing line. And even Christians that are in the clinical therapy community, they think that the prayer people are crazy, and the prayer people think that the inner healing people are or that the clinical, psychology and therapy people are crazy. And man, if we could just get to a space where they could coexist together, oh man, that could be such. And it's what I had to do on my own. I had to piece that puzzle together on my own. But I'm glad I did because I need both sides of it.
Yeah, in some ways, a little bit like the divide between the clinical medicine and like the folks who are more homeopathic, and there's this like, I never go to the doctor. It's like, well, you should go to the doctor, and it's like, well, no, how about we can do both things? And how valuable a thing it might be. Imagine that, to live into a faith practice that is not dependent upon or defined by the way in which I believe. In other words, my experience of the divine is not the divine. And so it's if my faith practice isn't predicated on or defined by the way in which I believe, how valuable a thing that might just be in order to actually call it a faith.
Man, so good.
So one of the things actually a little bit of a break here. We're at 33 minutes. What time do you need to be out of here?
Let me look here. Hang on. I probably have 5 or 10 more.
Okay, great. So let's do this. I want to chat, if you're cool with this, I want to dive a little bit into, because we're going to push the book and all that, but I want to talk a little bit about race and online communities. Yeah,
man, let's do it.
So, it was last year. you're really active, redemptively active through a lot of your social media channels, and specifically on Instagram, watched this thing play out where you posted a piece about an image about Philando Castile.
Yes.
And there hadn't been on your page like a whole ton necessarily about race relations and the police, et cetera. And then there was this moment which everyone was experiencing. Well, not everyone. A lot of us were experiencing where like there are these questions being asked, and you dove in with this image about Philando Castile and about justice and about his relationship with law. Can you talk? I want to go in through the doorway to talk about you as a person of color in a context in which there's like the vast majority of the audiences you end up in front of are white evangelical or white mainline Christians.
Yes.
And yet you have you entered into this place. I don't know if you want to call it necessarily like a privilege or responsibility to kind of tell, as a storyteller, to tell a story that is deeply critical of white evangelicalism, of white culture.
Yeah.
Can we start with that post and the interactions you had, and then talk about your experience as someone who has access to white evangelical, white mainline Christian culture, dealing with issues of race and trying to do so responsibly and redemptively and trying to take people with you.
Yeah. When the Orlando thing happened, I think the reason why I finally, it wasn't from pressure from the outside or people telling me, I've got great friends of mine that is what they do. They're activists, and they, that's never felt like part of my story or part of my journey or kind of who I, but more and more living in the South, as a man of color, I was having to face situations that I just knew none of my white friends were facing. Right. And when that happened, I finally said something, and man, it was so funny because here's the thing. Exactly what you said is right. I stand in front of a majority of, evangelical white middle-aged soccer moms, and that is kind of that's who follows me. If you look at even my Twitter following, like it's soccer moms, it's 35-year-old soccer moms in minivans, like that's kind of the world I live in. And suddenly it was almost as if people were shocked to realize I wasn't white. That was the
right.
First thing.
That was exactly my experience with folks interacting with you on Instagram. Was like, y'all, do you not know? Like, he's not a white guy. This is not a white man.
It was so funny to me because suddenly I was like, my jaw dropped, and I was like, oh my gosh, they are so comfortable with me.
Yes.
This is why I get booked at their conferences and churches, which, listen, hey, don't stop booking me. I love you guys. But at the end of the day, I'm not white.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I actually do exist in a different world than you do. So although I live in the suburbs of Nashville, Tennessee, most of my neighborhood's white. The people I travel with are white. The people in the Delta Sky Club, as I go from here to there as a diamond on Delta, are white. Like, I'm not. And so I finally got to the point where I had to, step into and express who I am and what I have to deal with. And I think number one, that what I want to say is I was blown away at, I think people were surprised I wasn't white. And, but I say that, but then again, I look at some of my friendship circles even, and sometimes I'll be in, a couple drinks in, and me and my buddies are on a fire and we're having a good time. And then suddenly, like, the jokes turn racist.
Yep.
And they're looking me square in the eyes, telling me racist jokes, and it's as if they don't see me and my skin color. Yeah. And I'll have to remind them, hey, this is actually offensive. And they're like, oh my gosh, like, sorry. And they'll say things like, sorry, Carlos, like, I just forget that you're not white. Like, they'll say things like that.
It's just the worst. It's just the worst.
Is not the worst, And so, like, what I've had to come to is, okay, I have to take some responsibility for this, and I need to realize that I've allowed that to happen, and I really have. And so I have to actually start saying things, stating things that are going to be unpopular to a lot of people. Probably the majority of my tribe is not going to be comfortable with me speaking this way. Yep. But that was the beginning for me. I think what's ended up happening is I've been able to build a bridge between kind of that white evangelical culture that may not be looking at race relations in the way that they would have without me. And so now
you feel there's sort of like as a bridge builder. I mean, you have, it seems to me, a responsibility, or you feel a kind of responsibility to, I don't want to say necessarily both sides per se, as if there are sides.
Yeah.
But I mean, you feel a responsibility to tell a story of a Latino black male.
Yes.
But to do so in a way, and maybe you can help me with the wording of this, but to do so in a way that like takes your white sisters and brothers with you, like, can you dig into that sort of tension? Because it's like there are times when you have to choose, right? There's times you're going to disappoint somebody.
Yeah.
How's that get worked out?
You know, it has any disappointment that somebody has had in me because of issues we disagree with. It's just kind of what I do. I always, because what ends up happening is things escalate on social media really quickly. And so what I do is I send my phone number in a direct message or a private message to whoever this conversation is escalating quickly with, or it could be through email. And I'm always the one that says, I will not have this conversation over a digital form with you. Like I want to talk with you about it. And I'll go and tell you, I've probably given my phone number out, I don't know, 50 times maybe. I mean, that's just a guess, but I've had two people call me, because really? At the end of the, yes,
that is a terrible ratio, man.
Isn't that horrible? Because at the end of the day, people, when they really sit back and look at what it is they deeply believe, they don't want to talk out loud about it, because when you say something out loud with your lips and it comes out off your lips instead of off your fingertips,
yeah, man,
it suddenly is a lot uglier than when it comes off your fingertips. And so I want people to say things with their lips. I want people to say things out loud. And something else that I had to do is realize that I had been for way too long identifying more on my Mexican heritage, my mom is from Mexico. See, my father is a black Panamanian, but he also is from Panama. And if you look at the country of Panama, they look like brown Hispanics. They're not black. They're not African. Well, again, I had never, it was almost like a safe space for me, because I was like, oh, I'm Latino. Like, my mom's from Mexico, my dad's from Panama, so I'm going to relate as a Latino. But the problem is the world, the cop that pulled me over, 3 times in 3 weeks going down White Bridge Road, exactly, was not seeing me as a Latino. He was seeing me as the truth of, well, actually, my dad may have been born in Panama, but if you go to Ancestry.com and he does his DNA test, he was only one generation in Panama. Before that, it was the Cayman Islands, and before that, it was Nigeria, and I'm African. There is African in me, and I have to live as that. And so what I had to do out loud as well on my social media platforms is begin to live as a black Latino, as a black man. And that made a lot of my followers uncomfortable, because they never heard me say that or saw me as that. And suddenly they're like, oh, Carlos is going to be another one of these loud black guys, and it's like
another one of these loud black guys,
and it's like, I say that because that's an actual email that I got from a fan, quote unquote.
Oh my gosh.
Now I say that with the premise that he was actually one of the two that called me.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, then that's a nice little story then.
So, yeah. It really is. There's a nice little bow there. But man, we are living in it's tense times, man, and it is. It's not time for us to be quiet. It's time for us to get loud. And so that's what I'm doing, and it's been a interesting road the last year and a half of that.
Well, so there's a great bit from a poet named I'm going to get her name wrong here. I'll fix it later on. But Naira Wahid, who basically writes that, like, you just don't trust people who don't see your color, because by not seeing your color, they're not seeing you. They're just not seeing you as a whole person. And part of why I'm really valuing about what you're doing and what you're doing with the book is you're repositing yourself as someone who has, if I can be so bold as to say, has been sort of maybe even pigeonholed as with particular uses. and like a particular way of being in American evangelical Christianity, and saying, no, you have to treat me and see me as a whole person. That like, you have to see my blackness. You have to see my brokenness in order to see me as a whole person. I think what you're up to with the book is great, and I look forward to the fruit it bears over the course of years. Man, so thanks for spending some time with me this morning, man.
No, it's so good, and I really appreciate even you kind of bringing this side of the conversation up, because it is. At the end of the day, it was such a massive risk for me, because I just wanted to put a little caveat at the end of this last conversation, because again, my identity, going back to even the high, my identity was Carlos. If I looked at it and was black and white and totally honest, Carlos is a brown guy that white evangelical churches feel safe to bring in. And sometimes say, hey, we brought in hey, look at our stage. We've got a high energy brown guy jumping around on stage, singing high energy worship songs. And he sounds like Chris Tomlin, so things are great, And I had to look myself in the mirror and really kind of say, okay, Carlos, like it's time to step away from this, and you're not going to be near as safe anymore if you start to have this conversation. But I think, again, in the end, that's what you're supposed to do. So it was a scary space to be. But at the end of the day, I think as is shown in the book, I think it's a space that now, this book is just bringing a lot of freedom to a lot of people, a lot of healing to a lot of people. And I think this kind of the message of the book is going to be really the next 5 years of my life, really helping people kill their spiders. I love it, man. Seriously, appreciate your time. Appreciate you. Yeah, dude. Keep it up. Absolutely. I'm glad we got to do this, man. Absolutely. Talk soon. Right, man. Bye. All right, bye. And thank you for listening to this episode of the At Sea podcast. If you'd like to follow up with Carlos Whittaker, you can visit him at his website, which is very simply carloswhitaker.com. 2 T's in Whittaker, WHITTAKER, carloswhitaker.com. From there, you can research not only the new book called Kill the Spider, which is definitely worth your time to read, but also the book previous to this, which is called Moment Maker. Anything you're looking for with regards to the At Sea podcast can be found at atseapodcast.com. And if you want to find out who I am, you can ask me what I do, and we can start there. Or you can visit justinmcroberts.com, and I will find you there. Also, and lastly, thank you so much if you're one of the folks who support this podcast as a patron. If you'd like to join the small army of folks who make this possible, you can visit us by visiting Patreon. That's patreon.com and searching my name, Justin McRoberts. Until next time.